This video is brought to you by Brilliant. In a number of videos we've published in the last few months, we've pointed out that the British political system is undergoing something of a realignment. The traditional Labour-Conservative duopoly appears to be crumbling before our very eyes at the hands of political maverick Nigel Farage and his Reform UK party. So far though, the conversation has largely been focused on Reform apparently overtaking the Conservatives and becoming the de facto opposition party. It seems they may have already done this though, and in the past couple of weeks, conversation among journalists have moved on to whether Reform have now overtaken Labour too, and are on course to completely shatter the duopoly and form their own government. So in this video, we're going to have a look into this and examine exactly how they became the most likely party to win the next election. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. In all 16 polls conducted since the local elections, Reform has been out in first place, which is their largest sustained poll lead ever. In the first of these polls, conducted on the 1st of May, Reform's lead was moderate, either tied with Labour or ahead by a mere point. The weeks that followed saw this lead climb, and by the 10th of May, Reform's lead had widened to a massive 10 points. In fact, in one of these polls, Salvation predicted that if this was the case in a general election, Reform would end up with 334 MPs, Labour would end up with just 150 MPs, and the Tories with just 23. Essentially, Reform would be able to form a government with a majority of 18. And the thing is, it's not just the party polling that seems to be on the rise at the moment. We're also seeing Farage personally rise in the favourability polls, at a time when his rivals are sinking. In the last few weeks, Keir Starmer has seen his plummet to -46, and Kerry Badenoch has seen hers drop to -39. In both cases, these are their worst numbers on record. Farage, though, has seen his favourability rating rise in recent weeks, to -27, the highest since he became leader last June, and above that of Starmer and Badenoch. It's clear then that there's a significant amount of support for both Farage and Reform, and that this support has increased markedly in recent weeks. So, what accounts for this? Well, as we see it, there are three main reasons: Starmer's lack of coherent political narrative, Reform's lack of scrutiny, and the implosion of the Tories. Let's look at these in turn. Now, we all know that since the election last year, Keir Starmer has struggled as Prime Minister. In the first few months of his tenure, he made the politically difficult decision to means test the winter fuel payment, angering older voters. Then he changed the tax rules so that agricultural assets worth over £1 million were no longer exempt from inheritance tax, angering rural voters. Then he cut overseas aid, reduced funding for the welfare state, and introduced harsher immigration rules, angering those on the left. Making the difficult decisions early on in your tenure isn't uncommon, nor is it a bad political strategy. Doing so without a compelling narrative, though, is. It's become clear that Starmer just doesn't have an overall vision for Britain, and voters have noticed. Prior to the election last year, 49% of respondents claimed that they were unclear about what the Labour leader stood for. Since the election, this has increased to 60%. This has been driven primarily by those who backed Starmer in 2024. 75% of them said they had a broad idea what Labour stood for prior to the election. This has dropped to 50% today. Additionally, YouGov also found that a plurality of respondents said that Starmer had moved the party and their policies too far from his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn. Say what you want about Corbyn, but it was clear what he stood for. This isn't true for Starmer, and it seems that he's being punished for it. Reform is evidently capitalising on this. As a right-wing populist party, their narrative is simple. The main parties can't be trusted, the political system is failing ordinary people, and if elected to high office, they do what the people actually want, which in Reform's case is actually lowering taxes and immigration. Starmer's counter to this recently seems to have been trying to lean into Reform's political narrative, namely by trying to be tougher on immigration. Right now, it's too soon to see how this has affected polling, but the risk is that it looks politically opportunistic and will just play into Reform's hands. Anyway, moving on to the second reason Reform is polling well: a lack of scrutiny. Up until the last few months, Reform was not seen as a major political player in the UK, and thus managed to avoid the scrutiny that other parties regularly receive from journalists. Generally speaking, the plans of opposition parties are trawled over by journalists, which can hurt their mass appeal. As they rise in the polls, we should expect this scrutiny to intensify, potentially having an effect on their polling. For instance, in the run-up to the election, they released a manifesto of sorts, which included some absolutely massive promises. For example, £150 billion of spending cuts and £90 billion a year of tax cuts. Economists such as Carl Emerson at the Institute for Fiscal Studies pointed out that their numbers are a vast underestimate. If implemented, reform would save tens of billions of pounds less than they predicted, and the tax cuts would cost tens of billions of pounds more than they predicted. The point we're making is that when journalists do turn their attention to reform's plans, their polling could start to take a hit. And finally, the third reason that reform is polling well is the continued Tory implosion. Kemi Badenoch's leadership is in crisis right now, and she's proven ineffective at resurrecting the Conservative Party. Primarily, this is the reason that reform is able to dominate in the polls. No longer are we seeing vote splitting on the right, rather the right-wing vote is simply starting to coalesce around reform. Now, this seems like good news for reform at the moment. The problem comes when and if the Tory party decides to ditch Badenoch. Right now, the frontrunner appears to be Robert Jenrick, who credibly could move the party further right and deprive reform of their USP. Alternatively, there's a chance that things get so bad for the Tories that they decide to bring Boris Johnson back. This would be an even bigger problem for reform. The point we're making here is that while the Tory party is in crisis, reform is polling well. All it takes, though, is for them to gain a new, more electable leader, and they might begin to feel a squeeze in the polls. If you're engaged with complex topics like these, it's probably fair to say that you're at least somewhat interested in improving yourself through interesting, engaging online learning. If so, you'll be interested in this week's sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant is a learning app designed to help you understand topics from the ground up, on everything from maths to science to AI. Each lesson is filled with hands-on problem solving that lets you actually play with concepts, a method that's proven to be 6 times more effective than watching lecture videos. To add to this, their app is designed to help you learn wherever you are, with fun hands-on lessons that you can do whenever you have the time. So instead of mindlessly scrolling on social media, you can get smarter in minutes a day. For instance, Brilliant's newly updated science course helps you make sense of our universe at every level, from the mechanics of simple machines all the way up to black holes. The course helps you better understand the world we live in by explaining the physical principles that drive modern technology, while helping you develop your scientific intuition through visual, interactive problem solving. To try Brilliant for free, visit brilliant.org/TLDR, scan the QR code on screen, or you can click on the link in the description. By doing so, you'll get 20% off an annual premium subscription, and they'll know that you came from us, which really helps us out.